I used to think Adidas was just another sports brand with a clean logo and a deep marketing budget, until I understood that its origin is not a branding story at all, but a family tragedy disguised as corporate history. Because the history of Adidas is inseparable from the story of two brothers who started with the same obsession, the same workshop, the same dream, and ended up building two empires on opposite sides of a wound that never healed. Adidas is not just about shoes. It is about how ambition, pride, and unresolved conflict can shape entire industries. Adolf Adi Dassler and Rudolf Rudi Dassler grew up in post-World War I Germany, in a country broken, poor, and desperate for function over fantasy. Their mother ran a laundry. Their father worked in a shoe factory. There was no romance in their beginning-only necessity. Adi was the introvert, meticulous, technically obsessed, happiest when tinkering with materials and spikes in a small workshop. Rudi was the extrovert, charismatic, aggressive, a natural salesman who understood people long before he understood products. On paper, they were the perfect partnership. One built, one sold. And for a while it worked. They started making shoes in their mother's laundry room, literally crafting footwear from scrap materials, army surplus, and whatever could be found. This wasn't entrepreneurship driven by vision decks. It was survival engineering. But Adi had a dangerous belief that athletes deserved equipment designed specifically for performance, not generic footwear adapted after the fact. That idea seems obvious now. Back then it was radical. Sports shoes were not optimized. They were tolerated. Adi wanted to change that. The early breakthrough came not from advertising, but from obsession with athletes. Adi didn't see customers. He saw use cases. Runners needed traction. Footballers needed stability. Each sport demanded different solutions. The Dassler brothers' factory became known for listening to athletes in a way competitors didn't. This culminated in a moment that would echo through history, the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Jesse Owens wore Dassler shoes and won 4 gold medals. In Nazi Germany, an African-American athlete humiliating the regime in German-made shoes was both a triumph and a contradiction. For the brothers, it was proof. Product mattered. Performance spoke louder than ideology, but history is rarely kind to partnerships under pressure. World War II didn't just divide nations, it fractured families. The Dassler factory was pulled into the war effort. Relationships strained. Mistrust crept in. Stories differ, but what is clear is that resentment fermented quietly for years. Accusations of betrayal, of meaninglessness, of ego, of disloyalty. The brothers stopped being collaborators and started being rivals long before the companies split officially. When the partnership finally collapsed in 1948, it didn't end politely. It detonated. The brothers divided the factory, the workers, the town, and even friendships. Adi named his company Adidas, stitching his nickname and surname together. Rudi would go on to found Puma. The split didn't just create 2 brands, it created 2 opposing worldviews competing in real time. Adi's Adidas doubled down on engineering and athlete trust. He believed performance innovation would always win in the long run. 3 stripes weren't chosen for aesthetics. They were reinforcement, literally stabilizing the shoe. Form followed function. Branding followed credibility. Adidas grew slowly but deeply embedded itself into professional sport. World Cups, Olympians, coaches. Equipment mattered, and Adidas wanted to be where results were measured, not where hype was loudest. Rudi's Puma took a different path. Faster decisions, sharper marketing, aggressive sponsorships. Where Adi sought validation through athletes' performance, Rudi sought attention through visibility and speed. Puma was louder, more confrontational. The rivalry became so intense that the town of Herzogenaurach effectively split in half employees and families, choosing sides, people checking shoes before deciding who to talk to. This wasn't competition. This was identity warfare. What made Adidas endure wasn't that it won the brotherly feud. It was that Adi refused to let emotion override craft. Even as Puma chased faster cycles, Adidas invested in long-term relationships with teams and institutions. The brand embedded itself into the fabric of sport. This wasn't glamorous. It was patient. It meant being boring sometimes. It meant losing short-term battles. But it also meant becoming synonymous with legitimacy. As decades passed, Adidas faced its own tests. New competitors emerged. Nike in particular reframed sportswear around belief, narrative, and lifestyle. Adidas, rooted in European sport tradition, initially struggled with this shift. Performance alone was no longer enough. Culture was entering the game. And this forced Adidas to evolve without betraying its origin. The three stripes had to mean more than engineering. They had to travel into music, streetwear, and identity without becoming hollow. This evolution wasn't smooth. Adidas stumbled. It chased trends poorly at times. It lost relevance in key markets. But unlike brands built purely on marketing, Adidas had something harder to destroy: institutional trust with sport itself. That trust acted as an anchor. Whenever Adidas lost its way culturally, it could return to performance, rebuild credibility, and try again. This cycle of drift and return is a direct inheritance from Adi Dassler's philosophy. You can experiment, but you must always respect the athlete. The most haunting part of the story is that the brothers never reconciled. They are buried in the same town, in opposite ends of the cemetery. Even in death, the distance remains. That unresolved conflict shaped two global companies, employing hundreds of thousands of people, influencing culture, sport, and fashion worldwide. This is the uncomfortable truth behind Adidas's history. Greatness can be born not just from vision, but from fracture. Adidas's tale is not inspirational in the clean way brands like to present themselves. It is messy, human, and driven by flaws as much as genius. It shows how rivalry can sharpen focus, how pride can fuel innovation, and how unresolved wounds can echo for generations. The three stripes are not just a logo. They are a scar turned into structure. And this is where the story deepens, because understanding Adidas is not just about how it started, but about how a company born from conflict learns to survive in a world where competition no longer looks like a brother across the river, but like entire cultures shifting beneath its feet. And the question becomes whether legacy is a strength or a weight, as the sentence continues into the next phase, where Adidas must confront what it means to honor its origins without being imprisoned by them as the journey moves forward without pause, where legacy stopped being a foundation and started becoming friction. Because once Adidas moved beyond its founders and into a global hypercultural marketplace, the rules that once guaranteed relevance no longer worked automatically. Performance engineering was still respected, but respect alone no longer created desire. Sport no longer lived only in stadiums. It flowed into music, streets, social feeds, and identity politics. Adidas faced a challenge far more complex than its rivalry with Puma: how to remain authentic in a world where authenticity itself was constantly questioned, remixed, and exploited. This was the phase where Adidas had to accept a painful truth that many heritage brands resist until it's almost too late. You cannot inherit relevance. You can only inherit responsibility. The three stripes carried weight, and weight can either anchor you or slow you down. Adidas experienced both. At times, it chased culture, clumsily borrowing aesthetics without fully understanding the communities behind them. At other times, It retreated into pure performance, hoping technical credibility would automatically translate into cultural heat. Neither extreme worked for long. The market had changed. Consumers no longer separated sport fashion and self-expression. They demanded fluency, not just authority. The real breakthroughs came when Adidas remembered its original strength and translated it into new languages. Collaborations were not just marketing stunts when done right. They became modern versions of Adi Dassler listening to athletes. Kanye West was not simply a celebrity endorsement. He was a cultural force, reshaping how people related to identity, ambition, and rebellion. Yeezy worked not only because of hype, but because for a period of time, Adidas allowed culture to lead, while it provided infrastructure, manufacturing discipline, and global scale. It was a risky surrender of control, and for a while it paid off explosively. But that success also exposed the danger of relying too heavily on borrowed gravity. When a brand ties its momentum to volatile individuals, it inherits their instability. Adidas learned this lesson the hard way. Severing ties became inevitable, bringing financial pain and reputational risk. The moment echoed the original Dazzler split in an almost unsettling way. Another separation, another wound, another reminder that no single person, no matter how influential, can be allowed to define an entire brand. What allowed Adidas to survive these shocks was the same instinct that had sustained it from the beginning, returning to core discipline after overreach. Strip things back. Recenter on sport. Reinvest in product. Recommit to athletes not as billboards, but as genuine partners. Adidas didn't abandon culture, but it stopped letting culture tear it apart. The brand recalibrated, asking harder questions about which collaborations built long-term meaning and which merely rented attention. This was not glamorous work. It was corrective work. Adidas's journey from two brothers to a global icon reveals a pattern that repeats across business history. Conflict creates focus. Success creates drift. Drift demands recalibration. And recalibration is only possible when a company knows exactly what it refuses to compromise on. For Adidas, that non-negotiable has always been performance integrity. Shoes must work. Apparel must serve movement. Everything else can evolve, but that cannot be faked. In a world obsessed with storytelling, Adidas survives because it still builds products that force stories to be proven through use. The unresolved pain between the Dassler brothers never healed, but it left behind something unexpectedly durable: competitive tension embedded deep in the brand's DNA. Adidas is uncomfortable with complacency. It questions itself more than most legacy brands dare to. That self-doubt inherited from a fractured origin is not weakness. It is vigilance. It keeps the company from believing its own mythology for too long. The true story of Adidas is not about defeating Puma, Nike, or any other competitor. It is about managing inheritance. How do you honor where you came from without becoming trapped by it? How do you let go of old battles while preserving the values forged inside them? Adidas is still answering that question in real time, and that is why its story remains alive, rather than frozen in nostalgia. If this story made you see legacy brands differently, stay with this channel. Subscribe for more unfiltered journeys behind global empires, where success is built, not on glory, but on fractures managed well enough to keep the whole structure standing. And leave a comment sharing what this lesson made you feel, because how you react to stories like this often reveals exactly where you are on your own building journey.